It had been a year since my divorce from Emily, and life had taken an entirely different course than I ever could have imagined. I had moved into a modest apartment downtown, far from the house that had once echoed with the sounds of our shared life. My days were quieter now, filled with work, reading, and the occasional catch-up with friends. It was a simple life, devoid of grandeur, but it brought me the peace I had so desperately craved after the storm of our separation. Since the final court date, Emily and I had maintained a strict silence. Neither of us reached out. The wounds from our breakup were still raw, and I convinced myself it was better this way. I wasn't sure I could face her without the pain and resentment resurfacing. Then, one cold November evening, as I was settling in for a quiet night, I heard a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so when I opened it and saw Emily standing there, I was utterly stunned. She looked hesitant, her posture unsure, and her eyes carried a mix of determination and unease. "James," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. I stood there frozen. "Emily, what are you doing here?" I finally managed to ask, my mind racing with confusion and guarded curiosity. "I know this is unexpected," she began, clasping her hands nervously, "but I need to talk to you. It's important." A flood of questions filled my mind. Was she here to rehash the past? To stir up old wounds? Or had something serious happened? Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and motioned for her to come in. She entered cautiously, sitting at the very edge of my couch, her posture stiff. I took a seat across from her, keeping my distance. Whatever she was about to say, I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. "It's about my dad," she said finally, her voice barely audible. Her words caught me off guard. "Your dad?" I repeated, frowning. Richard, her father, had always been a thorn in the side of our relationship. From the moment we met, he made it clear he didn't think I was good enough for his daughter. His constant interference had created countless arguments and tension between Emily and me, widening the cracks in our marriage. "He's really sick," she continued, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "The doctors say he doesn't have much time left, and he's been asking to see you." "To see me?" I asked, incredulous. Why would he want to see me? She hesitated, taking a deep breath before speaking. "He wants to apologize, James. He feels responsible for what happened between us." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Richard, the man who had done everything he could to undermine me, now wanted to make amends? I wasn't sure how to react. Part of me wanted to laugh at the irony, while another part of me felt anger bubbling beneath the surface. "I don't know, Emily," I said after a long pause. "This feels complicated. I know it's a lot to ask," she said quickly, her voice pleading. "But it would mean so much to him. And to me." I studied her face, searching for any hidden agenda or ulterior motive. All I saw was sincerity and vulnerability. Despite everything that had happened, despite the hurt and betrayal, a small part of me still cared about her. And seeing her so earnest and desperate stirred something within me. After what felt like an eternity, I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said. "I'll do it." 2 days later, I found myself standing outside Richard's hospital room, bracing myself for the unexpected confrontation that lay ahead. My heart was pounding as Emily stood beside me, her expression unreadable, her usual composure giving away nothing of what she might be feeling. After a brief, almost imperceptible nod from her, I reached out and pushed the door open. Inside the room, Richard sat in a chair, looking frail and diminished, a shadow of the imposing figure I had once known. His skin was pale, his frame thinner than I remembered. Yet when he saw me, his face lit up with a weak but genuine smile. Despite the obvious effort it took to remain alert, his eyes shone with emotion. "James," he said, his voice hoarse but steady, carrying a weight of sincerity that took me by surprise. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, unsure how to respond, a jumble of emotions swirling inside me. For years, I had harbored resentment toward this man, blaming him for much of the strain in my marriage. Now, here he was, vulnerable and seeking something I hadn't anticipated. Closure. He took a shallow breath before continuing. "I've been thinking a lot about the past," he said, his gaze steady on me. "And I realize now how much I messed things up for you and Emily. I thought I was protecting her, but all I did was hurt both of you." His words hit me like a wave, bringing a sudden ache to my chest. Hearing Richard acknowledge his role in the pain that had, in so many ways, shaped my life, was more than I had expected. What we had endured was both shocking and strangely comforting. My throat tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. Finally, I managed to say, "I appreciate you saying that, but it wasn't all your fault. Emily and I made our own mistakes, too." A faint smile tugged at the corners of Richard's mouth, and his eyes softened. "Maybe so," he murmured, "but I hope you can forgive an old man for his part in it." I swallowed hard, feeling a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a strange sense of release. "I forgive you," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. That conversation marked a turning point. After years of bitterness and distance, it opened a door for Emily and me to reconnect. Not as a couple, but as allies in a shared effort to support her father in his final days. We didn't hash over old arguments or dwell on past grievances. Instead, we focused on the present, on how we could be there for Richard and for each other during such a profoundly difficult time. Richard passed away a few weeks later. At his funeral, Emily and I stood side by side, united not by love, but by a quiet mutual respect. In the days that followed, we found ourselves talking, not about what had gone wrong between us, but about the memories we had shared, the lessons we had learned, and the people we had become. We didn't get back together. That chapter of our lives had closed. But for the first time in years, I could look at Emily without feeling anger or sadness. Instead, there was a sense of peace, a recognition of the good times we had shared and the growth that had come from our struggles. Months later, an unexpected letter arrived in the mail. It was from Richard's lawyer, informing me that he had left me a small inheritance. Along with the money was a handwritten note. "James, thank you for forgiving me. Use this to start something new. You deserve it. Richard." As I read the note, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. Richard's words were simple, yet profound, a final act of acknowledgement and generosity. That night, when Emily knocked on my door, I never imagined it would lead to this. Not a rekindling of romance, but a path toward healing and understanding. Life has a way of surprising you, and I've learned that forgiveness is one of the greatest gifts you can offer, not just to others, but to yourself.